Well, the Helen Suzman Foundation, despite its criticisms of government, has welcomed the extension of the Zimbabwe exemption permit to the 31st of December. It's welcomed it as a humane gesture, it says, by Minister Aaron Motsoaledi. The Zimbabwean Immigration Federation is one of two other groups who are also part of that litigation. We're joined tonight by its chairperson, Dzviti, who's with me in studio. Luke, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for coming in. So how helpful will this exemption be to the thousands of Zimbabweans who are in South Africa and trying to find a way in which to continue to work and study here?
Okay, thank you so much. My organization really welcomes the extension by 6 months of by Department of Home Affairs, because it means an extra salary. You know, that's the honest thing. But a lot of things are still happening which are not quite interesting. As you know, the ZEP holders have got kids. Most kids are unable to go to school because their parents need to be regularized first. So some kids have been sitting since January, and you know, it's unfair for a child not to go to school because the parent is not legalized, and Home Affairs is taking long to finish the process. We've got Uber drivers who are Zimbabweans, truck drivers who are going through hell in KwaZulu-Natal because they need to have driver's license. Unfortunately, the exemptions, permits, this extension is not working at traffic department. I don't know if the minister is aware of that. Whoever has got a license that expires, it gets screwed up and it ends there. And it's quite unfortunate, but we are quite grateful with the extension by 6 months. You know, it means an extra salary. We still have got a court case which we have not yet shelved yet. We're still waiting for the outcome. We've been waiting for the past 2 weeks, and we hope it will be out sometime soon, and whatever the court judgment, will be welcoming it.
And the main court case had to do with challenging this period where the deadline was the 31st, or the 30th of June, where the ZEPs would basically, if you didn't have one, then you'd miss the boat, right? But now we've got an extension to the end of December. Does that make or render the case moot?
Yeah, we are not shelving the case like, abandoning the case like what I just said recently, because there have been many flawed processes within Department of Home Affairs. This waiver thing, again, is another process which we are considering could be flawed, in a sense that applicants are supposed to motivate why their employer got a South African and not a Zimbabwean, which should be an issue between an employer and Labour Department, and not the applicants. Some of those, you know, in January, most people couldn't apply because at one time, when you are a ZEP holder already legal in the country, while applying, they would ask you when is your intended visit to South Africa, which makes an applicant look as if he has never lived in South Africa. But however, when we went to court, the first days last year, Department of Home Affairs were rejecting all applications, right? Everyone who would apply for a waiver would be rejected, being told that this job is reserved for South Africans. All we know is rejects. It's only after the court cases where the minister decided finally to recall some of the outcomes he did previously, and
you're referring to the categories of work where,
yes,
basically, if a Zimbabwean national was in that post, they were told, well, this is a skill that a South African can provide, therefore it does not justify, shall we, for want of a better phrase, you remaining in the country to fill this post. There have been changes to that. Waivers are now being issued, correct? 1,500 applications for visas and waivers, the minister says, is what the Home Affairs is receiving. How well is that process working?
Okay, it's a figure that I heard the minister speaking on national television, that there are now 1,500. Maybe it's correct, right? But however, the system is not working well because some of the applicants in Johannesburg are not getting slots to go for interviews. So some would apply and go for weeks without a response from Home Affairs. Things are not going well, right? Because we also have some ZEP holders still awaiting outcomes since 2017. You know, they still have receipts from 2017, and now we are on another level where the ZEP holders should apply for other visas while they are still awaiting for the same ZEP.
Right.
So it's a process which is not going well because there are some who are still waiting for outcome. There's no waiver holder who got a good outcome for a waiver who has got a visa so far. We are very worried that if the court outcome may not come good on our side, the minister might start rejecting all applications. Last year he was rejecting everyone using the same template, right? It was more like they would change a name for this one and put another name and send us a reject. That's why we had to go to court, because there were only rejections despite different motivations.
And let's talk about that. You make a good point. A waiver is not a visa. So let's talk about the difference and still the limbo then that remains because of that clear difference between getting a waiver and then ultimately getting a different type of visa to stay in the country.
Yes, a waiver is simply a request to Department of Home Affairs to ask that they stop us, they cancel off some of the requirements that a ZEP holder might not have, right? And then there will be some requirements that the applicant will certainly need to have and will only apply with those, but a visa is given on discretion. One can still be rejected for a visa despite getting a good outcome of a waiver. That's why we are carrying on with our court cases. Because it will be unfair for someone who has made life here. Try to imagine someone who has lived since 1985 and is permanently employed, who were given legitimate expectations in 2014. Because they accepted letters of all ZEP holders being permanently employed, it means forever. So the ZSP by then didn't state that we will relook into your permanent employment in 2022. So when one is employed based on being permanent, it starts contributing pension, set to mature when one is 65. And so if it is cut all of a sudden, it will cause a lot of anguish. That's why our advocate, Tembekangu Kaitobi, said we are sleepwalking into a catastrophe, you know.
And one of the things that Advocate Ngaitobi, when he represented you in court, spoke about was around the fact that he said government had not been able to prove, for example, that conditions back home allowed for Zimbabweans politically and economically to go back there and enjoy a decent quality of life, because when some of these exemption permits were granted to many of you, it was precisely because the situation back home had become so bad.
Yes, the situation has not yet improved in Zimbabwe. We've got 3 reports from credible international organizations which write a grim picture of Zimbabwe. Just to give you an example, you all know Vice President of Zimbabwe was in South Africa for treatment. Why didn't he get treated at Parenyatua Hospital in Zimbabwe? You see, the health facilities in Zimbabwe are terrible. That's why women are also running away from there, even trying to give birth in South Africa. Because it's terrible out there in Zimbabwe, right? The health facilities haven't improved. There's no employment in Zimbabwe, right? The government was saying, okay, guys, we are going to welcome ZEP holders back to Zimbabwe at the expiry of these exemption permits. But how do you welcome someone who goes from being employed to be unemployed? Because when one has no more job, that they will go back to the situation they left Zimbabwe.
But look, what about the South African government's right to reserve right of admission, for want of a better phrase, to decide who it wants to allow in and out of the country and on under what conditions? Do you agree that the country should hold that right?
Yes, I agree with you. But currently the Minister made a new directive, 02 of 2023, where ZEP holders will not be subject to Section 29, 30 and 32 of the Immigration Act. They are allowed to go in and out of the country and to continue being employed. So if he revokes that, the new migration policy, which I saw circulating some other time, a lot of people will be affected. That's why we've got court cases, so that those permanently employed can keep on working in South Africa. Right. And by extending to December, the same situation we are in right now will still be in December. Remember, the Home Affairs
6 months is enough time.
It's not enough. They might not be able to finish all the applications because there are still those other 56,000 for other visas who applied for the past couple of years and they haven't got responses. Just like I said, we still have some ZEP holders awaiting outcome of their ZEP permits.
So what happens, do you think, when we get to the 31st of December and there are still thousands of people in limbo, waiting either for an outcome or for their papers to be processed? What do you think is going to happen?
What's likely going to happen on 31 December this year is that the minister will likely extend by another 6 months to June 2024, right? But then permits cannot be ended in the middle of the year because kids will still be going to school and they can't stop going to school in the middle of the year. So the minister will extend by 6 months, and just before the 6 months, he might likely extend by another 6 months to December 2024. By then, ZEP holders in South Africa would have lived for 6 years, which is a year more than time frame required for one to be permanent residents. ZEP holders must just be given permanent residence to end everything.
But you know the argument against that, right? The argument is that the country is already dealing with so many of its own problems, and it's unfair to expect South Africa to take on nationals from another country. There's also, you know, you've seen even the videos that have gone viral about dependence on public resources, including health, etc. What do you ultimately see as the solution to all of that? Because there is also an issue where existing among South Africans and Zimbabweans, there is tension there.
Yeah, I've experienced a lot of tensions from other organizations like Operation Tutula and ATJF, who decided to put law into their own hands by doing whatever they wanted people's workplaces. I wanted to say this: we are not responsible for unemployment rate in South Africa, for this high unemployment rate in South Africa, which was assumed to be about 34.7%. In 2010, we were 250,000 ZEP holders, right? Now we are 178,000 left. Our quantity is going down, and unemployment rate in South Africa from 2010 has gone up from 10% to 34%, but the number of ZEP holders in South Africa is going down. So ZEP holders are not the ones responsible for high unemployment rate in South Africa. You see, during COVID time, a lot of companies closed down. That is the other reason why unemployment rate went up, because not all companies managed to reopen afterwards, and it affected a lot of people. But recently, employment rate has been improving, right, from the figures I see. Employment rate is improving, and getting rid of Zimbabweans doesn't mean employers would substitute a Zimbabwean with a South African, because it's costly. I once worked at Rainform there in Boysens, you know, where the company spent about $1 million for our training with people who came from Europe. And so to just remove Zimbabwe, it means they are telling the company to look for another $1 million to train a South African, right? The company might not be able to afford that. Most of the people who are going out of the workplaces are not being replaced. Same as the domestic workers. They are more like a family. You know, the kids know domestic workers as their second mother.
Look, Dzviti, much more is going to turn on this story in the coming weeks and months. But for now, thank you very much. I'm sure the Home Affairs Minister, if he's watching, has plenty to say in response.